You're live. All right, we'll let our participants enter the room. Welcome to powerHouse Arena's virtual events. My name is Chris, I'm the events coordinator, and we're very pleased to be hosting the launch of Norman Ives, Constructions and Reconstructions by John T. Hill, a powerHouse book's title. John will be in conversation with Leonard Stokes. You can buy copies of the book at powerhousebookstores.com. The link is in the event page, and I'll post it in the chat here as well. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and John will take your questions at the end of the event, and I'll introduce our speakers now. Leonard Stokes was Norman Ives' assistant, colleague and friend at Ives Silman, art publishers in New Haven, Connecticut. He worked with Ives on various book projects, including Formulation Articulation by Joseph Albers and Walker Evans' 14 Photographs. He also worked with Ives on a number of mural projects in the late 1960s and early 1970s. John T. Hill is a graphic designer, author, and photographer. Hill was Norman Ives' student and teaching colleague at the Yale University School of Art, where he taught both graphic design and photography. Hill co-founded Yale's first department of photography and was its first director of graduate studies. As executor of the Walker Evans estate, Hill produced books related to the work of the iconic photographer, including Walker Evans' lyric documentary and Walker Evans' Depth of Field. And I will hand it over now.
Thank you very much, Chris. I want to thank you and Arena for inviting Len and me to come and talk about our old friend and colleague, Norman Ives. We both had the good fortune of knowing Norman for some years, and it was such a rare experience. We hope that this book will be a sample. This event tonight will be a sampling of some of his work from the book, Constructions and Reconstructions. And we hope it will encourage you to buy a copy because we think it cuts across a lot of different fields. He had 4 different careers running simultaneously. He was a fine artist, a graphic designer, a teacher, and a publisher. So from there, we go a little bit to talk about his life. He was born into a family of a naval officer, and he traveled a lot, moved around a lot when he was a young man. He spent 5 years of his life in the Coast Guard. And as soon as he was finished for the Coast Guard duty, he enrolled in Wesleyan University's college in Middletown, Connecticut. And they had a very solid art department that was based on modern concepts and all that. And these are 2 examples of work that he did there, and they reflect his interest in literature and classics. I'd like Lynn to say some words about these.
Well, what I can say is that I knew nothing about this work, and this is one of the value of the book for me is learning more about who Norman was even before he showed up at Yale, and I kind of blundered into his orbit. They're wonderful. I mean, I see. I certainly see an influence of Paul Klee, but also perhaps Arp and Miro, and I'm thinking it also gives me some respect for the Wesleyan Art Department whenever Norman was there, because this is I'm delighted to learn about these through the book.
It was a remarkable department run by a man named Sam Green, but the 2 in color ones are lithographs, and the black and white ones are etchings. And they're both on, very important literary subjects. On leaving Wesleyan, he was recruited to come to Yale to be a part of the first class taught by Joseph Albers. And this photograph sort of sums up the tectonic change that went on at Yale. Yale University had been the oldest art school in the country, founded and opened in the 1860s. And very little, if any, had changed in their Beaux-Arts style of teaching from the time they they started until the late 1940s. Dean Charlie Sawyer and the head of the architecture department, George Hurt Hamilton, decided that they should hire somebody to shake the thing up. With Whitney Griswold, president, gave them the free rein to hire Joseph Albers. So Joseph came and really literally turned the thing on its head, and he was able to call it the School of Design for at least a year. It was not the School of Art, but a School of Design. This is an example of Norman's part of the technology that he brought from Wesley. And these are wood, this is a woodcut. It's a stunning example of his draftsmanship. It's Sheila Coulter, and he somehow sort of channeled the ability of a Japanese woodblock cutter. I thought it was really, I had never seen anything like it of his, but human society and the world and the whole of mankind is to be found in the alphabet. These are two examples of student work of Norman's when he was at Yale. The one on the left is an anecdotal construction with Victorian letter forms that were available in the type shop at Yale, and they're all made on a Vandercook proof press. And the one on the right shows his interest in sort of making formal studies out of combining letter forms. Len, what do you have to say about this?
Well, to me, this is the seed from which his signature lifetime's work springs. I'm assuming these are from wood type that was available to him in the shop, and so he composed it, and then what do you think about three different trips through the Vandercook? But there, it's like the letters are being deconstructed. They're not there for their literal meaning. They're there for form, and equally important, counter form. You know, the negative spaces have the same role to play as the inked letters themselves. So it's like this is where it all springs from.
I think it's a brilliant example of the use of the printing press to make art. He filled the entire bed, the 32-inch bed of the Vandercook proof press to make this. And there are so many of these that were made that way. Here, it's an early collage made from alphabets that I'm sure he printed on the Vandercook, and then he cut them. They were made specifically to be used as collage. And so he made this two-color, very simple but very powerful collage. And again, it's a game of figure ground. It's not about color relationships or any of the Joseph Albers teaching, but it's pure Norman Ives. At the same time, he was using printed ephemera that were available around him. Len, what do you think of this?
Well, it's a beauty. It's a beauty. I think my when I think about Norman's work, what he and I see the influence of Albers, both Joseph and Annie for that matter, but there are so many different readings or constellations of form within the same image, that the letters themselves, and then there's the vertical horizontal grid, then there's the diagonal grid, and you can't, you get this, the privilege of going from one reading to another reading to another reading, and that's what makes his work so thrilling to me to look at. You know, there's just not one, he never did a one-liner. They engage you, and there's just so much to discover within each one of these things.
And you have to remember that all of this is done on a grid, but it's done so subtly that the grid does not become evident. And if you look hard, you'll say, oh yeah, there's a grid there. But anyway, this is more printed ephemera. These happen to be matchbook covers that a friend gave him, 2 boxes of matchbook covers, and he did this pair of collages. Lynn, if you had anything to add about it, I know you're a collagist, and anything about this seems to be have a particular spirit.
Well, they're so they're so playful. It's like I don't know, Kurt Schwitter's what Kurt Schwitter's put on the grid. They're fun to look at. It. Of course, part of Albert's teaching was not just drawing and design, but was color. And what I've been learning by seeing all these images in the book is that that so many of these pieces, which have such different feeling tone in terms of color, so many of them really are using the same basic colors throughout as well. You know, it's like, and it reminds me of something Matisse said, there's nothing that says you can't make an infinite amount of music, I'm paraphrasing in a terrible way, but with just 7 notes, you know, like it's, that's what you have, that's what you work with. Yeah.
This is a very important collage, I believe, because it's a stunning piece, and it's one that was begun in the 1960s and completed in the 1970s. But it's the first one that I've noticed where the counter spaces, the white of the paper, has been painted over with gouache, to white opaque gouache to enhance the contrast. Lynn, I don't know, what do you think of the title Empiric? How does that figure into this image?
Well, I don't know. I mean that there is something there's something like flags and pennants about it, and but I don't know. I mean,
well, the only thing I think, the empire, the word empire comes to mind, and these colors they sort of suggest flags and various other things. I really don't know the source of this material though. Lynn, you had wonderful things to say about this before. I'd like to have you try again.
well, this one puts me in the mind of Juan Gris. I mean, I don't know whether Juan Gris was someone that Norman talked about, or but there are some Juan Gris pieces that are so subtle, and then you realize that there is a grid at play within it, and also some of the Juan Gris has the diagonal kind of grid to it. But again, I'm impressed that the palette of this piece is by extension, I mean, not literally the same colors, but it's red, white, and blue. And the one that Empiric is red, white, and blue. But the question is which red, which white, which blue, in which kind of proportion, which kind of distribution. And so I guess the thing that strikes me over and over with Norman is that his work within constraints and limited means and such infinite invention and variety. This is beauty.
This is titled Faceted. This collage, I mean, it really doesn't strike you as being a collage at first, was done quite late, not very long before he died. And it's a rather large piece, and you see some English broadsides that have been torn and added to it. But it's, Lynn, what do you think?
Well, it looks, again, it's one of the ones in the book that surprises me, because this was not anything I'd ever seen before. And he just, there's so many sides to him. How big is it, John? I mean, it feels big. It has that kind of scale. It doesn't.
Well, it's such a surprise to me as well. As is this one. It's titled Limehouse, and it's made from color aid paper that have been cut into shapes that somewhat suggest letter forms.
Well, this one was another big surprise for me, in the sense that when I learned that it was color aid, it was like, no, that's impossible. Color aid is nothing but saturated reds and blues and greens, and so he found that part of the color aid palette. It's in there, but it's not. It doesn't scream color. I think I told you when I saw it for the first time that it looks like a watercolor to me, and that's an amazing transformation of a flat matte silkscreen surface paper.
But you know, it's an interesting counterpoint to the figure ground 2-color work that he does. Here he's exhibiting, I guess, vestiges of Joseph Albers' color studies, and he shows that. But then in other pieces, they're denied categorically, there's disfigured ground in two colors. Ives was magnetically drawn to the Roman alphabet. It's as if the alphabet was waiting 1,000 years for Norman Ives to appear and fall head over heels in love with it. That's from a very nice essay of Leonard Stokes that's found in the book Norman Ives, Constructions and Reconstructions. This is one of the most surprising things that I found in the archive later on, and there are dozens, if not hundreds, of these sketches, gouache, a wet gouache paint on tracing paper. And you know that that's going to produce a ripple effect on the tracing paper. But I rather enjoy the fact that there's that crinkling and that translucence. We still don't have a real reason why he would do so many of these things on tracing paper.
Maybe that's what he had lying around the studio that day. I don't know, but because not just the wrinkling, but the abrasion of the surface. When I saw this one again for the first time, through the book, I immediately thought of kind of a fresco, Pompeii or Herculaneum, and
Oh, it has that. It has those colors in it.
whether we can credit Ives for anticipating that, I don't know, but I love what it's doing.
Well, the other thing that you may notice here was the first time, it's a grid of 16 squares. Within that, there's a grid of 9 squares, and within that, there's a grid of 4 squares. He's playing with his grids, but it's really a wonderful sequence. Here's a very important painting, and it's all about figure ground. It's hard to say this is color relationships. These are a series of wood blocks or wood frames that have been covered with raw canvas. He then painted a sheet of canvas with a red acrylic. While it was red, he sprinkled orange dry pigment over it. And then when the whole thing dried, he cut up the red canvas into letter forms and made this 6-foot painting, which is in the Yale University Art Gallery. Len, if anything come to mind?
Well, it's a beautiful piece. I knew nothing about the technique of it, but it tells me it's not only and again it's a very Albersian thing to go deeply into the exploration of form, but here he's going into the exploration of materials and process as well, and it's just so open-ended and sort of fresh.
This painting is an 8-foot square, and it marks, it underlines the fact that Ives was respected as a fine artist and as a graphic designer. In 1967, this painting was included in the Whitney Annual Exhibition of American Painters, and it was along with his mentor, Joseph Albers, Andy Warhol, Cy Twombly, and Willem de Kooning, any number of other major artists. Ives was right there with this major painting. He loved to experiment with shapes. Hexagons seem to be a favorite of his. This is about figure ground and color. But here's a beautiful little collage made up of hexagons. Lynn, you must say something.
Wait a minute, can I just sit here and admire it? I mean, this is like I hear the Charles Ives piece, I'm blanking on the name, the 4th of July at Stockbridge or something like that, when the marching band sort of crashes into the lyric of music. So this is like John Philip Sousa. It's just a delight to look at. So it's so playful, and I guess I'm really struck with the idea that the learning again that he came in later when the white wasn't right and hand painted the white into the.
I think it's really a very whimsical piece. I love it. not very big, probably no more than 10 or 11 inches.
Hmm.
This is a very early silkscreen print. He continued his interest in printing technology and discovered that silkscreen satisfied his needs very nicely because he could then change colors very easily by just wiping out, cleaning up the screens and changing the colors again. This is a small silk screen of, it's 9 squares with 4 squares within. And about 10 or 15 years later, he made a 3 foot, he made a 3 foot painting of this and changed only one element, and that's the orange square in the top center was turned into a blue square. But it's an example of his taking a motif that he liked and then reworking it later. This is a silkscreen print that began as a collage, and he had the screen prints made, and then he cut them apart, and then he had some others made. It was a long process. This is called spring. Lynn, what's up?
Well, again, when I saw this, when I thought of, again, he's using that same palette, and I guess of the red, the blue, the white, but I guess what makes it spring is the green. the green is a surprise in this. Also, again, he's never locked into any one. I mean, still the vertical horizontal grid, the diagonal grids, but here he's opening up the interstitial space, more grouting, I guess you'd say.
I think that's a very important point, because this doesn't happen that often, where he consciously opens up that space in between to have these lines become a very important part of the piece. In the early 1970s, he took a little detour and started doing overlaid letters, which fractured them by their transparency or their translucency. But it also was an occasion for him to play with his talent and his love of word games. He was very good at crossword puzzles and anagrams. This is, I think, a brilliant screen print. It's titled Centaur. And before I saw the title, I spent much too much time figuring out that the letters here spell horse, oh man. If I'd looked at the title, I think I could have gotten there sooner. Lynn, what about it?
Well, I mean, it's a stunning thing, and it's such a change in direction, because here the letters assert themselves as letters, and then he's added to this dimension of it actual content and meaning to what they spell, as well as the effort it takes to decode it. I mean, again, it's like you cannot get but engaged with this work. You can't just, it's never background music. You have to confront it and get, I mean, this whole aspect of his work was less well known to me, which again is why I think this book is so valuable, because we get to see so much of everything that was Ives, and not just a little snippet of it.
These are two other examples of letter forms that spell things and also make a wonderful sort of cacophony of shapes and colors. The colors are in a way important, but it's not about color relationships. It's really about the whimsy and the figure grounding. The one on the left spells A-bombs. The one on the right spells something that all artists are familiar with. It says broke again. In 1973, he and his family went to Guanajuato, Mexico, and he began doing a circular series, which continued after he got back. I have never been able to crack the code on these letters, but that really is an aside in a way.
Well, for me, it's a fascinating sort of excursion that he took away from the grid, And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, well, what happens if I don't have the grid? What happens if there are no corners? And
Here's a prime example of finding a construction that you like and sort of running it into the ground or seeing how many permutations you can find. The upper left one is an acrylic painting. It's probably 30 inches square. The one on the right is also an acrylic painting on canvas. And the one on the right is so subtle, I had spent some time before I recognized that it was the same construction as the one on the left. The lower left is a screen print. The lower right is a bas relief that came in various sizes, but the values have been changed to depth of the depth of the bas relief. It's called Reversed Grounds. I think it's a very important work and one he obviously enjoyed sort of exploring. There were times when he left the letter form entirely and just made constructions. This is a mathematical progressions of tall and short pegs painted with the white tops. There are 2 or 3 others of this sort. Len, it's all yours.
well, this it's a beautiful construction, cousin to that Yale piece of the orange and red. I found myself kind of scanning back and forth between the two, but the relief work was just I guess maybe that springs from having worked with the wood type, because he'd be familiar with these letters not as just flat things on paper, but the volume of the letters themselves. And then he went to town with it. Nevelson comes to mind, but of course they're only because it's black in 3 dimensions. I mean, I think they're very different places. What's your take on it, Jim?
Well, I think you're right on. I think the figure ground thing here is really stunning. It's hard to know what's figure and what's ground. It's a very successful piece. Here's one that he just is sort of celebrating the color of the natural wood. It's either bass or bass and poplar, I'm not sure. This was a gift to his business partner, Cy Silman. He enjoyed making little whimsical gifts for friends and children of friends. The cube on the upper left is a 4.5-inch cube, and there are 6 collages. It's quite a beautiful object. The one on the right was given to his friend Arnie and Dolores Biddleman, who had 2 children. It's a cigar box that he's transformed into a toy with these 9 blocks. So there are 9 blocks, each with 6 surfaces, and he decorated the outside of the box, and he also decorated the bottom of the box, which we're not going to see today, but if you buy the book, you'll see the full story. This is a very important statement from Norman. There's a major difference in painting, which deals in private symbols. Graphic design deals primarily in public symbols. This is from an essay that he wrote for Industrial Design magazine in 1960. And Norman was, I think, a rarity in the way that he wrote and his ability to write about what he was doing. Alvin Lustig had encouraged students how important it was for them to write about their process. And I think Norman is one of the few that really was able to deliver on that. It also is a statement that leads us into the next section, which is his graphic design. You have to remember he was a fine artist, and all the work that we've seen until this point was personal work and personal symbols. But then he, on the other hand, he had a great mastery of form that lent itself to making symbols and logos. These are from a book that he published, he self-published in 1960, printed on the Vandergrift press by one of his students. And there are 8 symbols. Some of them were actually used, and I think some of them were just done for the joy of making symbols. He also, in this book, wrote a very interesting little explanation for all 8 symbols. And that's one of the only times I can cite when he's actually writing about his own graphic design. These are obviously jobs that he did for Yale, and some of them are still being used. Lynn, what about these?
Well, what surprises me, no, not surprises me, but what intrigues me about Ives is that his personal work, it's not that he just decorates a design with his personal work. It's like he reaches each problem that's been set before him and finds an elegant solution that meets the needs of the commission. And so he that's why he was such a successful designer at the same time. And it wasn't like they weren't hiring Norman Ives to. It wasn't like getting buying a certain kind of brand of clothing or something that had the look of an artist's style. The Annie Albers thing is beautiful, just a thread.
You know, it's just amazing how he's able to reduce the number of objects in the frame and still have so much visual activity going on there. Everything seems to be sort of inevitable in the way it's placed. You can't imagine changing anything. The one on the left is a softcover jacket for a Gertrude Stein publication done by the Yale University Press. And again, you see him using the Victorian wood type that he probably printed this on the same press that he had used as a student. I cannot explain, I can't find the source of this one on the right. He used it, and back to the example of his being respected as a fine artist, in the same year of 1967, he was recognized by the Museum of Modern Art, being included in an exhibition called 3 Graphic Designers. And these 2 pieces were included in that show. The other 2 were Massimo Vignelli and Almir Malvinier. It traveled a bit, but it was a recognition of his importance as an artist and a designer. This is a Yale publication that he produced the jacket for and probably the layout for as well. It's a picture he took of his mentor Joseph Albers. It's in the newly completed Louis Kahn building, the Yale Art Gallery, and it's photographed through a screen, which gives it an interesting softness. And the sculpture on the right is one of Albers' students, Will Ryman. Here are 2 posters that were also included in the Museum of Modern Art's exhibition. The one on the left is sort of trying to provoke you into figuring out what's going on here, because it's not the most clear and easy to read. But the visual activity and the content of it, I think, really draws you into it. The one on the right is from the Stable Gallery, which was organized and run by Eleanor Ward, who was a genius. And she handled the work of Cy Silman and Norman Ives and Andy Warhol and a lot of other people. Glenn, what about these?
Well, I mean, it's wonderful seeing the poster on the left. You have to spend time with it, but it's a totally different way of decoding that. Unlike the anagrams, when they're all jumbled together here, it's the separation by color and spacing. Yeah, I wish I had it. I wish I had it on my wall. But again, the difference between the one on the left and the one on the right, wasn't there some question about whether he invented the alphabet for the Tony Smith?
Well, I think that's a very important question, and you're not the first to question that. I think he could have, this could be hand drawn. It does not look like any typeface I know, and and for sure it's not one of the Victorian typefaces that he had available.
It's definitely not Victorian. Yeah.
This is in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art, the Tony Smith. He was invited by Brad Thompson, his teaching colleague, to do two stamps, and I think they are real stunners. The octagonal. This was printed on an envelope in this beautiful, subtle yellow green, spring green. But what a construction that is, 2.1 cent. This is the American Institute of Graphic Arts inviting Norman to do a publication for them. The image on the left, in a way, sort of is an irony, because I believe it's made as a potato print, something that kindergarten students use. And here it is being used on a very prestigious organization that celebrates fine type and typography. We should talk about his other, I would call, commission works. Paul Rudolph commissioned Norman and several other artists to do works for the new Art and Architecture building in the early 1960s. This is a mural that he did for the exterior wall of the dean's office. Len, do you remember this?
I thought, I was only 1 year in that building.
Oh, that's right, you were.
So I don't have a memory of this one, even though I can picture where the dean's office.
I think it's still there. Bob Stern had it conserved and cleaned and all that. It's still there, and it's very much revered. Everybody seems to love it.
It survived the fire. Then, right?
Well, it did survive the fire. Unfortunately, Sewell Silman's work did not.
No. So this slide resonates with me because I worked on one or another of these. These were some of the things that I painted, along with other people. I wasn't the only one that helped realize these really big paintings. But we were in the workshop. And
well, he worked with a number of architects, but William Reisman from Boston was one of his steady clients, and Reisman had designed this cinema complex, one of the first in Connecticut. There were 3 theaters together, and they had an enormous lobby. And I think Reisman realized that there had to be something to soften it and give some color and scale to it. So these 15-foot panels, there were 4 panels, each side had an image, so there were 8 in all. They wound up being trashed, but fortunately we found out that these were all repurposed or recycled from other things that he had done. This is a 70-foot mural, and also from the Reisman project in Southwest Baltimore High School. But it's all about figure ground, and it's all about what you can do with 2 colors, black and white. Len, you have to find something about this.
Well, it's crazy. I have to say that I'm glad I wouldn't have to work in that space. But what I love about it is it's so I mean, if you'd shown me that, or if I'd walked into it, I wouldn't think, oh, that's a Norman Ives. So he, again, maybe because it was a commission and an architectural space, it's dynamic. It's amazing. But you.
It is. This was a theater lobby in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts, and I think I'd go screaming out of the room if I had to sit there and sell popcorn all day and take tickets. But it's a remarkable thing. It's made of Formica, red and white and blue Formica. his relationship with Joseph Albers was very long and complicated, and obviously Joseph was his probably primary mentor, but this is an example of the publishing venture that he and his classmate Sewell Silman started. It was called Ives Silman Publications. And this is, the images on the right are from the Interaction of Color, a very important portfolio that they published of Joseph Albers' work. And it's become really an iconic piece about Joseph and his work. It really, people often thought it was Joseph's color theory, but it really is an invitation for people to sort of question how they see and what they see and how color relationships work. A second portfolio for Albers was Formulation Articulation. It was published by Harry Abrams. And Len worked on that, so I'm sure he has something to say about it.
Well, my memory, I mean, Interaction of Color was done before I ended up in New Haven, and I think what Norman and Cy did was say, well, because of silkscreen, and you get to approve every color relationship in the publication, what they proposed to him was, with the success of Interaction of Color, they said, we'll give you the opportunity to revisit every or any idea you wish to revisit of your life's work and realize it through the medium of silkscreen. So people will get, you've done your students' work, it's document of your teaching, and this will be a document of your life's work. You realize in that, not reproductions, but they what's the word I'm looking for? They orchestrated the silkscreens so that it was idiomatic to the process as a revisiting of his work. Yeah.
We also have to remember that he was a very respected teacher. He was elected, or he was selected by his peers as Teacher of the Year at least one time, and students really loved his criticisms. They were always in small groups and very personal, and he was encouraging to use letter forms and see how they could activate two dimensions. Here is Norman Ives and Christopher Pullman, Arthur Congdon, and Richard Ritter. I would also like to return to that for a minute, because his teaching career sort of followed the arc of Joseph Albers' reinvention of the art school. And Norman fit perfectly into that faculty. Albers put together a stunning sort of stable of teachers in painting, and Alvin Eisenman was also able to put together a remarkable set of teachers in graphic design. And when Norman arrived, he was met by Joseph Albers, Alvin Lustig, and Alvin Eisenman, all of them interested in printing and all of them interested in alphabets and letter forms. So he had fallen into a very good place. And it continued to be a big part of the teaching in the program. But during his tenure, which ran from the time he graduated until he died, that faculty that Alvin Eisenman put together was able to have the evolution of sort of modern graphic design separate itself from the tradition of commercial art. It became a much more demanding exercise and one much more respected. Oh, sorry. Lynn.
Well, I'm a big Wallace Stevens fan, so I recognize the quote, but A violent order is a disorder. B, a great disorder is an order. These two things are one. Wallace Stevens. There you go.
You have to connect that with what you just read.
Well, I don't know that it's a disorder, but it because he's in such control of everything, but it's powerful. I mean, it's and it feels huge, but I think, did I learn from you that it's really it's written on the back as he wrote mural, or?
It's written, on the back is written in his hand, mural sketch. It's 14 inches in horizontal measure. And it's, looks like a white gesso panel.
Well, it tells us that he understands the distinction between size and scale, because it's a small piece, but it feels huge even at this.
Can you imagine that at 20 feet?
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
Or would you like to live with it?
Yeah, I'd like to see it on when I'm cruising down Route 95 or something instead of that.
We should blow this up and make a 20-foot mural of it. I'd like to once again encourage you to consider buying this book. I think that Ives is a complicated man. He cut through several careers and I think opened a lot of people's eyes to what could be done when a fine artist applies himself to graphic design. And as Chris said before, it's available through powerHouse Books as well as normanives.org. I thank you for listening in, and I hope that you'll be encouraged to buy the book. Shall we end?
Yes. If there's anybody has any questions, they can.
Do we have time for questions? I'd love, if we could have questions, we'd be happy.
We got another like 10 minutes or so, and then if not, we can also wrap up as well. Let's see.
I'll wave hi to Ed Grazda. I see his name on the.
I'm afraid we went a little bit over our time.
The chat, you can see who's saying hello. But okay, yeah, that's okay. If we've gone over time, we can wrap up.
Did anybody ask a question?
Let's see. If you click on the chat here, let's see. Oh, you got somebody raising a hand.
We've got time, right? Because we started at 7. When we started 7 or 7.
I'm not going anywhere.
We started at 7:30. We got time. Oh, Laura Lee.
Hello, Len.
Hi, Laura Lee.
Hello, John.
Hi, how are you?
I'm so well. I'm so excited to be a part of this. What a wonderful tour through a very, very important legend's life. You're both so articulate. I'm just delighted in your words and your metaphors and all that but I come to expect that from Len after 40 years, but nonetheless.
But that's not a question, Ordo.
Here comes the question. First, the acknowledgement, and thank you, John, for doing this book and Len contributing to it. My question is, I'd like to hear a personal story about your interaction with Norman Ives that changed your life, that changed who you are as a designer. There you go. Thank you very much.
Len, it's all yours.
Well, I don't know that I could say that my life was changed by that whole faculty that I encountered as undergraduate, and I never got to study with Norman except in working for him. He was such a wonderful teacher by example, and his standards and his but I mean, there's stories about Norman as a person that he tickled me. I think I mentioned that we were talking what a modest man he is and a man of few words. And I remember that when I was still in New Haven and working for him, that it took me a while to get it, but the phone would ring and I'd answer the phone and there'd be dead silence on the other side. And it was as if Norman had already communicated what he wanted to say to me by telepathy. I finally wanted to say, oh, hi, Norman, after about 30 seconds.
Well,
And I remember him painting the paper with tea or coffee to make for some of the collages because it was too white. And then I learned in the book that he made the white whiter when he needed to with gouache. I was just a kid, a new kid on the block, but was inspired by him and his colleagues, and they taught me to see.
Well, it's an important an important question. It's one really to sort of answer. But we met in September of '58, and I immediately knew that we'd get along. He was a little bit shy and reticent, but and he was fairly aggressive and abusive in a funny way. But I didn't find any of that offensive. And so he and his family and my family became very close, and we celebrated holidays together. And his wife and I started the collection or the preservation of his archive, and she did a marvelous job with that. And I'm blessed to still have the 4 sons supporting the project and their enthusiasm and giving me access to the archive. We need to fund that archive. If you have in mind making a donation, it would be very much appreciated. I'm sorry not to answer the question more exactly.
We have William Ferris.
William Ferris.
Hey, John,
Hey, Bill, how are you?
I'm going to throw you an easy pitch.
I hope you remember Norman. I know you were there at the time.
I do. I visited his home when we picked up Walker Evans one evening. I want to ask you about how you would connect this amazing body of work with photography.
I wouldn't even think of that, Bill. I really have no idea how to do that. Well, they both are visual arts, and they both demand some of the same talents and perception about how you put an object together and how you juxtapose things and figuring ground. They all involve that to some extent, but they are, and in some extent, some photographs are abstract in the same way that some of Norman's work is abstract. But on the other hand, he was a very good photographer, by the way. He one of the theses that he did when he was at Yale was a photographic thesis, and it was very sort of modernist and abstract, but it was a very strong thesis. The other thesis he did was called, and it was very scholarly, it was 40-page thesis, and it was called Alphabetical Forms on Facades in the Northeast during the Brown Decades. And it's such a title that you want to think maybe this is a satire that he's pulling, but he really did pull off a very scholarly job about, and he photographed all of the letter forms and facades that he was talking about all over New York and Boston and all this. It's a brilliant thesis that really needs to be published. I don't know. He obviously respected photographs, and he was a great critic of photographs, and he published Walker Evans photographs. So I don't know. It's very hard to square those things, Bill. I'm sorry. It's another one of those questions that's very hard for me to answer. But I'm glad to hear from you.
What was his relationship in the Ives Silliman portfolio of Walker's work?
Well, I suspect it was Norman's idea to publish his work. And I had a very peripheral part in that. And I suggested that Thomas Allen Brown do the printing, which he did really a marvelous job of that. They're gold tone, selenium tone, and they were supervised by Walker. And fortunately, Ives Silliman took a real beating on that. Nobody was buying that portfolio at the time. And a lot of them were being sold later on to students at $75 each when the portfolios were broken up. But he finally sold the remainder of them to Harry Lunn, a dealer in Washington, D.C. But they were willing to take a risk on that. And I think they paid for it dearly.
All right. I think we have a few more questions. One of them is wondering, where's the archive located?
Like John Seton Ives, the youngest of the four sons, is a keeper of the archive. He and his family live in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. We sorely need to find a shelter and funds for cataloging and preserving that archive.
Right. Let's see. And then someone wants to know, to have you explain again the process behind the large orange and white painting owned by the Yale Art Gallery.
Good way.
The process with which Iconic was made,
What about Iconic?
the process of its
What
making.
did we describe the process?
Yeah, they want to hear it again.
They want to hear it again. All right. It was one of two paintings of about exactly the same size. The one that we saw was earlier made as a sketch in half the size. It was 3 feet rather than 6 feet. And he would have wooden blocks cut or wooden frames cut, and he would stretch raw canvas over these series of blocks. And then he would spread out a sheet of canvas and paint it with a red acrylic. And while the red acrylic was wet, he would stand over it and, probably with his hand or a scoop or something, sprinkle dried orange pigment, which then settled into the wet surface of the paint and became part of the service. It's a little tactile, it's a little changed in color, a little modulation. And then he would reassemble all of these blocks. It's a time-consuming process, but one that he used several times.
Someone wants to know about his work with Walker Evans.
His work with Walker Evans?
Yeah, is that something that exists? Or is that a misapprehension here?
Well, they were very close friends. We were all close friends. We were all quite often at the same table together on holidays, and he and Evans were great friends. And he admired Evans' work, and they were, they just had great fun together. They were really wonderful. It was a wonderful group of people that all sort of happened to come together in one time, and I can't imagine it ever happening again. The faculty at Yale there was just quite amazing. You had Herbert Matter, you had Alexei Brodovich, you had Leo Leone, you had Lester Beale, you had Armin Hoffman, you had visiting critics like Otto Leiker. It was just Paul Rand, Bradbury Thompson, Richard Guyot from Royal College. They were just, it was hard to imagine getting that many talented people together in one place. And Norman was very much a part of that. And it was just a rare time.
One last question and then we'll wrap it up. Where can we see some of Norman's pieces today in person?
Well, the Guggenheim owns 2 pieces, you can see. The Yale University Gallery owns at least 3 paintings and maybe some other pieces. The Florence Griswold Museum in Old Lyme has a small collection of Norman Ives screen prints. There are about 10 or 12 major museums around the country who own at least one or more Ives work, but they are not nearly as common as you might think. I'm hoping that this book will be a first step in making him more popular with museum curators.
Do you think it would be possible to go visit that high school in Baltimore to see the cafeteria and that 70-foot mural?
Oh, really? Oh, that got bulldozed, I'm afraid.
Oh, gee. Okay.
All right. Well, if anybody missed anything, we'll have this on YouTube on the powerHouse channel. Thank you so much to John and Leonard and everybody who asked questions. please buy a book.
Thank you, Chris. Thank powerHouse and Arena. I really enjoyed it. Appreciate it very much. It's very important for us.
No, that goes for me too.
Good night.
Night.
Good night. Thank you.